The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Mark. A leper came to Jesus, kneeling down, begged him and said, "If you wish, you can make me clean." Moved with pity, he stretched out his hand, touched him, and said to him, "I do will it, be made clean." The leprosy left him immediately, and he was made clean. Then warning him sternly, he dismissed him at once. He said to him, "See, did you tell no one anything? But go, show yourself to the priest, and offer for your cleansing what Moses prescribed. That will be proof for them." The man went away and began to publicize the whole matter. He spread the report abroad, so that it was impossible for Jesus to enter a town openly. He remained outside in the deserted places, and people kept coming to him from everywhere. The Gospel of the Lord. If you're wondering where the deacon is, his wife has got pneumonia, and he called me yesterday to let me know he wasn't going to be here today, so we keep him in our prayers. Don't let your worries get the best of you. Remember, Moses started out as a basket case. Didn't get that one, did you? Moses started his life out in a basket right on the river. Now, as we head towards Lent, just a couple of things. Of course, we'll celebrate Ash Wednesday this week. And now Ash Wednesday is not a holy day of obligation. Now, of course, hundreds of people will come to Mass to get their ashes. But it's not a holy day of obligation, so there is no Tuesday evening Ash Wednesday service or Mass. You only have the two services, the two Masses on Wednesday itself, Ash Wednesday at 9 a.m. in the morning and at 7 p.m. in the evening, and that's it. And like I said, it's not a holy day of obligation. But people come to get their ashes, so we'll have lots of people here, just like any Sunday or Saturday evening Mass. So I just want to remind you also that Ash Wednesday is a day for abstinence and fasting, binding under canon law, church law, from the age of 14 to the age of 59, which means that you are bound by sin to fast and abstain on Ash Wednesday. Whatever we mean by fasting and abstaining? Well, to fast basically means to have one regular meal, two smaller meals not to equal a full meal, and no snacks in between meals. And no meat. I know it's Valentine's Day. I don't have a lovey-dovey, so I ain't worried about it. Personally. I don't have to take anybody out to dinner for a steak or buy roses or anything. So how are you going to do it? I don't know. The bishop didn't send us a letter saying that, that the restrictions were lifted, because they aren't. So we have to follow it. So I just remind you, and remember also every Friday during the season of Lent as well is a day when we don't eat meat. It's a day for fish. And that also is binding under sin. So we have to remember that. And by the way, Mardi Gras is not a Catholic celebration. It's paganism at its best and hedonism at its worst. If you look back throughout the ages and you look at how the Catholic Church viewed the time before Lent, you'll discover that it was sort of a preparatory time. You prepared yourself a little bit ahead of time. The Tuesday before Ash Wednesday was called Fat Tuesday. I think most of us probably have heard of that name, Fat Tuesday. The reason for it being was that people who took their Lent serious fasted on bread and water for 7 weeks, the season of Lent, ate as little as possible. Fat Tuesday literally became the day when people ate all the fat that they possibly could. Pig fat, buttermilk fat, whatever, butter, it doesn't matter. Whatever fat they could eat, they would eat. To stock up and to store up some food and some things in their fat cells because they knew that the fast was coming. If you were living back in Germany, somewhere around the 12th, 13th, 14th, 15th, 16th century, and you've been a Benedictine monk, you would have had for breakfast, lunch, and dinner, hops that they made beer out of. Now, they didn't drink the beer, don't get me wrong, that's not fasting. But they ate the hops for the entire season of Lent. It was their fasting. It's the way the monks did it. There was many different ways that people fasted, but they fasted. The way we fast today literally has become useless. Because we give up chocolate, we give up smoking, we give up beer, we give up this, we give up that. In the end, when Lent is over, we go right back to it. You see, we understood, and the church has always understood, that fasting is supposed to be something that changes us. How does giving up chocolate and smoking and beer and candy and all the other things change us if we go right back to it? The practice throughout the ages basically was that you gave up something in your life as a sacrifice, certainly. And you detached yourself from whatever you gave up completely. The 7 weeks was just the beginning of that giving up. You gave it up literally for the rest of your life, and you never went back to it. And if you do that every year for the rest of your life, and you give up something every year, by the time you die, you will have stripped yourself of many, many attachments, even simple things like food, alcohol and chocolates and whatever else. That is fasting. That's the way it's always been done. We have lost that perspective. Now we simply think we give up some food and somehow we think we're pleasing to God. I want to encourage you not to worry so much about giving up anything as far as food is concerned and so on, but I want to encourage you to practice virtue, to become more virtuous. Christ is the most virtuous human being to have ever lived on the face of the earth. And in order to become Christ-like, we become virtuous. We don't grow a beard. We don't become a man. We don't have long hair. We don't have curls on the end of our hair. It's not it. In order to become Christ-like, we become virtue. How about practicing virtue? Patience. Ouch. There's something to work on, huh? No cursing. No yelling. No screaming. Kindness, gentleness, goodness, charity, you name it, whatever. How about practicing that every day for Lent? And don't stop being patient just because Lent is over. Continue being patient for the rest of your life. If you practice a particular virtue every year for Lent, you will have become, by the time you die, if you have many years, of a virtuous human being in imitation and likeness of Christ. That's what Lent really is all about. So look at yourself and see what you're going to do. And if you're going to give up something, certainly we can eat a little bit less. We can give up this and so on and so on. Certainly to detach ourselves. But the virtues are actually more important, like the cardinal virtue of temperance that controls our desires, to practice that. Because that already will help me to let go of things Instead of becoming attached to things, detach from them and become attached to God. Now, having said that, I want to go back a little bit into the beginning of the Gospel of Mark, which we read some weeks back. And the Gospel of Mark begins with a call of the very first 4 disciples: Simeon, Andrew, James, and John. Now, many people probably have read the Gospel of Mark 1,000 times, 100 times, whatever. But I'd be willing to bet you that we have no clue to what it means. To us, it's just a calling of Christ of these disciples. When in reality, it is a mystery. The entire Word of God is a mystery. And everything he does and everything the gospel writers wrote was inspired in mystery. To give you an idea, Simon, if you took these 4 names of these disciples, and in the Hebrew language, you took these names and you looked them up. Simon means obedience, obedient. Andrew means manly. James means supplanter. And John means grace. Now, what's interesting about that, it is by these 4 names that we are knit together into God. Because their names express the 4 cardinal virtues. Who ever heard of such a thing? Mark knew what he was doing. Christ knew what he was doing. This is not just a random choice. Christ knew exactly what he was doing. These 4 names express the 4 cardinal virtues that every Christian ought to have, operating within their souls. Obedience, manliness, supplanter, to do battle, to overthrow what is untrue. And John, of course, means grace, to persevere in truth. And if you take these and you define them, you come up with the 4 cardinal virtues of prudence, justice, obedience. Justice, prudence, temperance, and fortitude. Now, if I would ask anybody here if he even knew what a virtue was, most of us probably couldn't even tell what a virtue is. If I asked you to name me 1 cardinal virtue, we'd probably have a tough time even doing that. We might be able to name the 4 disciples that Christ called if we read the Gospel of Mark. But we miss the entire point of what we're called to. Christ, by calling these 4 disciples, is calling all Christians to become virtuous. To have these virtues in their souls, it ties us to God. And if you want to look this up, certainly you could look at, I'm going to use a little bit of the catechism here just to explain to you what a virtue is. Number 1804 and 1803 is where it begins. But a virtue is an habitual and firm disposition to always do the good. It always allows a person not only to perform good acts, but to give the best of himself. The virtuous person tends towards the good with all of his sense and spiritual powers. He pursues the good and chooses it in concrete actions. As Christians, we're supposed to do that in everything in virtue. Even prayer is a virtue, the virtue of prayer. Firm attitude and stable disposition, habitual perfection in the intellect that governs all of our actions, orders our emotions and passions, and guide our conduct and reason and faith. These four cardinal virtues play a pivotal role in the virtual life of the human soul. Because if I do not have these four cardinal virtues, I cannot have the 112 minor virtues, which, yes, patience is one of them. And St. Teresa of Avila tells us that the cardinal virtue of temperance is the single most important virtue that the human being needs in this life. Because it is the virtue that controls our self. It keeps us in check. And it helps us to make the right choices instead of just living on our emotions. Temperance is a more virtue that moderates the attractions of pleasure and provides balance in the use of created goods. It ensures mastery over instincts and keeps desires within the limits of what is honorable. The temperate person directs the sensitive appetites towards what is good and maintains a healthy discretion. Do not follow your inclinations and strength, walking according to the desires of your heart. In other words, our brokenness. Temperance is often praised in the Old Testament. Do not follow your base desires, but restrain your appetites. Love and hatred and anger and all those things are controlled by temperance. The cardinal virtue of temperance is found to operate and to sit and to control the 6 concupiscible appetites of the human being. When a person is truly temperate, they even dream temperately. So to be temperate every once in a while means nothing. The virtue needs to be established in the soul and to be there always. And oftentimes it takes a while to get a particular virtue. In the New Testament, this virtue is called moderation or sobriety. We ought to live sober, upright, and godly lives in this world, as St. Paul reminds us. Prudence. Temperance. Manfully, to do things manfully, to make the right choices with control, to control ourselves. Prudence is a virtue that disposes practical reason to discern our true good in every circumstance and to choose the right means of achieving it. The prudent man looks where he is going. Keep sane and sober for your prayers. Prudence is right reason in action. Right, St. Thomas Aquinas? It is not to be confused with timidity or fear, nor with duplicity or dissimulation. It is called the charioteer of the virtues. It guides the other virtues by setting rule and measures. It is prudence that immediately guides the judgments of the conscience. The prudent man determines and directs his conduct in accordance with this judgment. In order to be a prudent human being, you need to know the truth. You need to know what is right and wrong. And you need to form your conscience accordingly. And you need to make prudent decisions, not just emotional responses. Prudent decisions. With the help of this virtue, we apply these moral principles to particular cases without error, and overcoming doubts about the good to achieve and the evil to avoid. Like I said, if you're not going to remember all of this, but you can look it up in the Catechism, like I said, beginning with number 1803 and 1804 and onwards. The cardinal virtue of justice is a moral virtue that consists in a constant and firm will to give due to God, what's due to God and to neighbor. Justice towards God is called the virtue of religion. People who don't go to church on Sundays, who don't go to confession regularly like they're supposed to, do not have the virtue of religion because they do not have the virtue of justice. Injustice reigns in their soul. Because justice towards men disposes one to respect the rights of each and to establish in human relationship the harmony that promotes equity with regard to persons and to the common good. Why are we always yelling and screaming at each other? Because we do not have the virtue of justice established in our soul. Why are we complaining about God? Because we do not have the virtue of religion. Yet we want to go to heaven, but we don't want to take time to pray. We don't want to take time to learn, to do what is right, and so on and so on. The just man mentioned in sacred scripture, of course, Joseph is the only one in the New Testament who's even mentioned as a just man. Is distinguished by habitual right thinking and the uprightness of his conduct towards his neighbor. You shall not be partial to the poor or defer to the great, but in righteousness shall you judge your neighbor. Masters, treat your slave justly and fairly, knowing that you also have a master in heaven. How easy it is for us sometimes to look down on others, to treat others that we like in a particular way and others that we disagree with or don't like in another way. It's because we don't have the virtue of justice balancing ourselves in the way we respond to people. Now, yeah, we're going to give up chocolate. Oh, yeah, we're going to give up smoking. Oh, yeah, we're going to give up beer. We're going to give up candy and all that kind of stuff. What's the purpose of all of that? How is that going to make you a better human being? How is that going to make you a better Christian? These virtues will do it. If you want to do something for Lent, take a virtue. Doesn't have to be anything major. Practice patience. For some people, that's going to be major. Practice kindness. Practice gentleness, goodness, charity, whatever. The cardinal virtue of fortitude is a moral virtue that ensures firmness in difficulties and constancy in the pursuit of good. It strengthens the resolve to resist temptations and to overcome obstacles in the moral life. The virtue of fortitude enables one to conquer fear, even the fear of death, to face trials, hatred, and persecutions. It is a virtue that is most needed in a modern Christian, a modern Catholic today. Especially for us who live in an area where the Catholic Church is often downgraded and attacked for what it is. We're surrounded by Christians who don't understand what the Catholic Church even is. So they love to attack her. And what do? We get angry. Instead of being quiet or providing answers in a gentle and patient and kind way, we show a side of ourselves that's not Christ, not even Christ-like. We want to argue with people. It's not it. It disposes one even to renounce and sacrifice his life in defense of a just cause, to lay down my life for another if need be. In the world you will have tribulation, but be of good cheer. I have overcome the world, Christ tells us. Now, I got started on these 4 virtues because these 4 disciples that were called, in their translations, in the Hebrew, and in the Christian terminology and Christian understanding, these 4 disciples represent, in translation, the 4 cardinal virtues. I've yet to see a Protestant minister explain that one. But it's there. And I always like to explain to people, and I love to do it at funerals. There's always more to the story. As somebody said to me last night, you know, Father, I've read the Gospel of Mark. It's my favorite gospel, probably hundreds of times. I can't say I've read it 1,000 times, but probably hundreds of times. But you know, you added something to this particular gospel that now gives me a completely different dimension of how I will approach the Gospel of Mark when I read it. Because now I know that we do not interpret the Word of God according to our own definitions. We allow ourselves to be instructed so God Himself, through His church, can unveil the mysteries to us. And I said, yeah, you got it.